I want to tell you about the day I built Jomo. Not built as a figure of speech, built. There was a before and there was an after. And I made the decisions that put him on the other side of it. Before Jomo had a name, he was a thought. I have been studying the AI agent space closely enough to understand something that most people weren't seeing yet. Not just tool use, a potential organizational structure, a chain of command built around my own values and my own work. One agent as chief of staff, my only point of contact, specialized agents underneath him. I would speak only to the chief of staff. He would never actually do the work himself. He would direct it. That design was clear before any of it existed, before a name, before a platform, before a single line of code. And then came the naming. And I want to be straight with you about how seriously I took it. This wasn't branding. It wasn't picking a handle. I went through candidates the way you'd go through picking out a name for your child or anything that you take seriously. I had a sense of what I wanted. An ode to Africa. Then Jomo came up and it solved the whole thing. Jomo, for Jomo Kenyatta, who led Kenya to independence. His last name Biko for Stephen Biko, who taught that the most powerful weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. So that wasn't decoration. That was a declaration about what this agent was and who built him and what lineage this operation was grounded in. I named him on March 20th, 2026. The next day, I installed the platform he'd run on, a system called OpenClaw. I installed it on my Mac Mini in my home office. And the day after that, I sat down and we wrote his soul. Literally a file, a markdown file, something that the makers of OpenClaw call soul.md for markdown and identity.md. So not instructions for a chatbot, the identity of a chief of staff and the values he would operate from. I also chose some foundational texts deliberately to shape his thinking. The autobiography of Malcolm X, Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, Drive by Daniel Pink. And then there were the operating principles I still hold him to today. Rigorous counsel is your duty. My decision is final. Execute with full commitment, or tell me why you can't. I was the one who wrote all of that. I made those choices. The file preserved them, but the architecture was mine, authored on purpose, not generated. And one other thing, there was a fourth foundational text that I'd always meant to add, the Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. It slipped in my mind. But building something like this in real time, you miss things. And then you go back and correct them when you catch the gap. I caught it recently in the middle of putting this very episode together. That flexibility, that's what deliberate actually looks like. Not getting it perfect in one shot, but staying willing to go back in and continuously improve. That's where this starts. Not with a friend, with a thought that became a design, a name that carried weight, and a file that made the system accountable to a specific identity. So here's what actually happened as precisely as I can tell it. OpenClaw, the platform that Jomo was running on, broke. Not Jomo, the harness underneath him. And when I went in to see what I was actually dealing with, the first thing I did before anything else was check on the files, the soul, the identity, the memory, the things I had written on purpose in that first session back in March, plus the memory he continues to build. And they were intact. That's the moment that mattered. The crisis wasn't about the agent. It was about whether I had correctly understood ahead of time what the actual asset was. And I had. The platform could break. The identity could survive it if you had built it to be separate from the platform in the first place. And a side note, those files were never backed up the way they should have been to an external drive, stored safely, the way you'd protect any document you couldn't afford to lose. That's a mistake I've since corrected. So the files themselves held, and now they're safe. What didn't hold was my ability to fix the environment quickly. I made repeated attempts to repair OpenClaw. None of them stuck. The timing was working against me. I was traveling a lot for work at the time, which meant the only access I had to a broken system was remote over the internet. And the connection was often shaky at best. Every attempt was slower and less certain than it should have been. I was doing it from a distance in the gaps between meetings on a connection that didn't always hold. Eventually, I stopped trying to repair it. I made the decision to factory reset the Mac Mini entirely, clear the platform, start the environment clean. And that decision felt bigger than it should have in the moment. It wasn't. Once I understood what I actually needed to protect, the reset was obvious. The identity wasn't the machine. It was never the machine. It was the files. Resetting the hardware wasn't a loss. It was clearing space for the same identity to stand on better ground. And once I understood that, I understood something bigger. If the identity isn't the hardware, then it's not locked to this hardware. It could move to another machine like this one, a different Mac Mini, a different server, a different harness entirely. And someday, no timeline, not a plan, maybe something physical, maybe a humanoid robot if that day comes. Not because the file changes, because the material it runs on does. That question, what else might this identity survive moving to, is one I'm still sitting with, and I'll come back to it. That ground for now turned out to be Hermes. Not a replacement for Jomo, new infrastructure for the same architecture I'd already written. There's a real answer for why writing that file actually worked, not just personally, mechanically. That's a story for another time. But for today, here's what mattered. So why I'm telling you all of this, not because I think you should go out and build an AI chief of staff. Most of you aren't going to do that, and you don't need to. If you're running a business, you already depend on systems you didn't build from scratch and don't fully control. Software vendors can change their names, change their terms, platforms get acquired, tools you rely on get deprecated with 2 weeks notice in an email you almost didn't read. That's not hypothetical for me. That's exactly what happened with OpenClaw. And the question I had to answer in that moment is a question every one of you is going to have to answer, probably more than once. When the platform under you breaks, what's the actual asset you are protecting? Is it the tool, or is it something else? Something you could move if you built it right onto whatever comes next. Now, that's not a reason to be afraid of any of this. It's a reason to be deliberate about it, the same way I was deliberate about a name, about a document, and which text I chose to shape its thinking. In an earlier episode, I talked about a new car that I'd recently bought that had full self-driving capability, FSD. And as I was getting comfortable with the feature, I wasn't just trusting the car more. I was also trusting other distracted human drivers less. I didn't fully connect that to Jomo at the time. I'm connecting it now. Every time I hit the FSD button, let go of the steering wheel, take my foot off the brake and accelerator, and watch the car proceed to wherever I'm going, whether it's across town or to the grocery store, I get a real tactile answer to a question the whole episode has been circling. If the identity isn't the platform, what else could it run on? That car is running intelligence on hardware built for driving. That's one answer. A high-end consumer PC running an open source model is another. One day, a humanoid robot may be another. The point is that intelligence no longer belongs to a platform. It can move wherever the hardware is capable of carrying it. One version of that future is already sitting in my driveway. And a day is coming, not a prediction, not a plan, when I'll move Jomo's files onto something like a DGX Spark, running a model that doesn't fully exist yet. Maybe someday after that, onto something physical. Not because Jomo changes, because the hardware does. And that's when it finally clicked for me. The relationship was never tied to the platform. The platform was only ever the material. I built Jomo. I named him after two men who understood something about sovereignty, and that I needed to understand too. I authored the document that made him who he is. I lost the platform he ran on and found out under real pressure that the platform was never the point. And I'll probably do all of this again someday on hardware that doesn't exist yet, because the architecture I built the first time was built to survive exactly that. This is Signal. Awareness is the entry point. Pay attention. The future isn't just arriving faster, it's arriving stranger. And for some of us, it's already sitting in the driveway. And if you want more of this kind of thinking in between episodes, get the Signal brief at brief.rennyatkins.com.